Cool. Thanks everybody for joining today's Let's Learn Something lecture. Today I'm going to be talking about the business model canvas. Okay. Hello. So today's learning objectives, this is typically an hour and a half lecture that I give. But this one I'm going to try to bring it down to 15 minutes, so make it real quick for everyone to understand this tool and to see if this tool would be useful for you in any way. We'll try to work with you to work through the tool to see if we can develop a business model. So the objectives today is understanding the concept of business model thinking, understanding the different blocks that are within this business model canvas that we're about to look through, how to apply this to your actual business, and be able to understand the design process of asking questions about your customers, your value proposition, and your partners, and understanding how your business sort of all plays out. So, what's the point of a business model, or what's a definition? Describes the rationale of how an organization creates, delivers, and captures value. That's value is a term that's used in business school to try to, you know, define many different things. We'll actually learn what that definition means to us when we're building out a business model. So the first thing would be understanding the canvas. So, has anyone seen this canvas before? Okay.
Yes, I think you
I
showed
have.
it to us once.
All right, Mike, Megan, Michia. I
Yep.
remember you guys had came over to actually work on one of these before, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
As of today, yes.
Okay.
Lucy, I have before.
Oh, you have before as well?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah,
excellent.
I have to.
Okay, excellent. So everyone kind of understands the purpose of the canvas and what it's supposed to do for you, right? Or so I'll just go over it. The purpose of this canvas is just it's a tool, and it's a tool that helps you visualize what everyone may be thinking about when they're talking about a potential business model. And what it does, it breaks it out into different segments so that you can understand and visualize how does the value that you as an organization provide, identify the specific customers that you may be interacting with, and what key partners do you need to have in order for you to accomplish your mission. And so the first segment we're going to talk about is the customer segment. So it's highlighted in red on the right hand side of the canvas. So what is a customer segment? It basically identifies who are your customers, and more importantly, what do they think, see, feel, and when you identify them, it really helps you understand what are you actually doing for them. So there are multiple different types of customer, you know, segments, but there's also multiple types of business models that can address customers. So, for example, if you're a restaurant, you know, primarily your customers are people who come to eat at your restaurant. Now, it doesn't mean that you only are like a restaurant that only hosts, customers that come to your restaurant. You can probably even have like a catering side to your restaurant. And so these are people who are still eating your food and they really liked it and they want to hold corporate events and so forth. That's how you can identify your customers. But for the most part, it's really people who want to eat your food. Now, a multi-sided business model would be, let's say, a media company, right? Let's say if you're a newspaper, uh, you would think of your customers as, hey, these people who are paying money for the subscription to read my newspaper, right? The readers in my geographical area, people who are interested in the news that I report, Digital subscription. It could be a newspaper boy still delivering newspapers to people's driveways. Those are your customers, but it's actually a multi-sided customer type of business because, well, and usually if you read a newspaper, there's also advertisements in there. People placing ads, and so they're paying you money as well to be in your newspaper, right? They want to be they want to be to have exposure in certain demographics, geographies, or people who have interest in reading specific types of content. And so that's what we call a multi-sided customer, multi-sided customer business model, which means you're actually accepting money from two very different types of customers, right? It's the reader and the advertisers. And what you have to do is to be able to create value for both parties to continue to collect money from those two parties. Does anybody have any questions about customer segments? Nope. Okay. So we'll go to the next one, which I'm highlighting here, which is value proposition. This is the really hard one. This is the hard part of the business model canvas. What we're really doing here is we have to figure out what is uniquely compelling about your business. So your business can have a very specific specialty, right? Maybe they're really good at AI programming. Maybe they're really good at, you know, selling real estate. Maybe they're really good at maybe you're really good at cooking certain types of culinary dishes. It you know Being able to understand what specifically you're really good at and being able to map that skill to a customer is the one of the most complex parts about building a business model. Sometimes when you figure out what you're really good at, you realize the customer that you had identified previously probably doesn't really care about what you're doing, and so you have to find a new customer persona or segment. So this also describes the benefits that the customers can expect from using your product and service, and that's pretty difficult to try to just predict. It takes a long time to sort of understand what you're really good at and be able to concisely explain it in a value proposition.
So would that just be like, I mean, since it's hard to predict, would you just go with your hypothesis, test it out, and then come back and
Mhm.
repredict again?
Yeah. And that's sort of the point of this tool, right? It's really difficult to kind of explain this without some sort of visualization on what you're really good at, because I've never really seen a business model written by one person and sort of in isolation. It typically happens in a small team, maybe a leadership team with consultants that come in to help out. And the difficult part about that is getting everybody on the same page, right? Maybe you are all in agreement in philosophy on something, but in practicality, when you put it onto paper, it always usually becomes a little bit more complex once you see it on paper. And what this tool does, it helps you develop that common vocabulary within your group and that common language to understand if you guys are really in sync, and does it start making sense when you start putting everything on the canvas.
Right, thanks.
Mhm. Any other questions? No? Okay. And so this is the really condensed version of this. I'm going to try to keep it in 15 minutes. The last part I'm going to explain are the key partners. So the key partners are things that are really essential to your company, but you are not good at it. Okay. So what things are really important that your company needs to accomplish, but it's not, you can't accomplish that on your own. So a very typical one, let's go back to the restaurant example, right? A key partner for a restaurant would be, hey, a food supplier, a wine supplier, you know, commercial real estate that gives you a really ideal location to serve your customer segment. So, you know, as a restaurant owner, can should you go out and open your own farm and you know, produce your own food that you're going to bring to your restaurant? Probably not, because you just don't have time for it. But you know what? Quality ingredients and food is really essential to a restaurant. And so it really helps you, you know, understand what do you do. You have to have a really key partner who brings you the kind of ingredients that you need at a price that you can afford, and then you work with those ingredients and create, let's say, recipes and dishes that you can serve to customers who will pay you enough money to pay for the supplies, to pay for the staff, to pay for rent, and still come out on top at the end. So that's a, you know, that's a really these three things are probably the most important pillars of building out a business model canvas, and it's understanding which you know, which person, which activity, or what service belongs in which column, right? um, does anybody have questions about key partners? Nope.
Is this something where if you are just starting your own business, you might be doing a lot of the stuff that eventually would go to key partners? You know, you're uh, wearing all the hats, so to speak.
It could be typically a company that wears all the hats, like a startup business that does that. It typically does that out of cost considerations, right? Like, I can't afford a partner to do this right now. Or it could also be they're not precisely sure what their business model is yet, right? Those are typically the two general buckets that I've experienced when talking to people about, hey, I do lots of stuff. Okay. Do you do lots of stuff because you find it fun? You want to do lots of stuff? Or do you do lots of stuff because, you know, I'm actually not really sure what's the most valuable thing to do? You know, like I have to do all of it to figure it out. Or it's like, man, I can't afford that. I got to do all of this stuff. All right. Any other questions on key partners? Nope. Okay. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to run through some popular canvases that are already out there, so we can look at as an example of how organizations build out their business models. So this one is the Uber model. So let's all look at the customer segment portion, right? This is they have multiple customers here. They have riders, so that means when we order an Uber, that's us. Drivers, for people who have ever driven for Uber. Now, I think maybe one of the first things people may say is like, wait a minute, aren't drivers employees of Uber? Why would they be part of the customer segment? Well, technically, I guess, you know, drivers are customer or employees of Uber, but I don't know too many drivers who've actually visited Uber headquarters in San Francisco. You know, they're not this type of new workforce is they used to call it what, the gig economy or something, right? What they've really identified is that drivers are actually their customers too, because if drivers are not satisfied with the value proposition that Uber uh, would offer them, they would probably just drive for Lyft, or they'd probably choose another competitor or not participate. And Uber definitely needs to have a healthy core of drivers that are able to give their riders rides in any urban or any area that they serve. So it's actually a very important segment to them, and they have to treat them like customers because they're not necessarily getting money. They're actually getting money from the drivers because yes, they're doing the service, but they're also getting a percentage of every drive that these drivers are giving. You know, so I don't know what the percentage breakdown is, but they found it to be really important that drivers are actually their customers. So if we jump to the middle segment now to the value proposition, right? What does the company Uber have to do really well? Well, a platform to connect riders with drivers. So that means their app needs to be working, and it has to be there cannot be a lag or inconsistencies or mistakes. The next value proposition is easiest way around, anywhere, anytime, low cost luxury, various levels of service. So they've understood that the riders need to feel that it's, hey, this is the easiest way for me to get from one point to another, and that's going to be my first choice to as a transportation choice. Um, sometimes taxis don't operate, 24 hours a day. This thing, as long as there's drivers who are working out in, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., it would be available anytime, any day. Relatively, the cost is low, and the qualifications to become an Uber driver is your car has to meet certain standards to be a Uber car. You cannot, you know, buy a used beater and then use that as an Uber car. It actually has to have certain qualifications, and they inspect the car before it goes out on the road. And there's various levels of service. So maybe, I don't need to get to from one point to the other that quick. I'll do Uber Pool, right? So I'll save some money, but it may not be a direct route there. That we may have to pick up other customers, or I might hire Uber. I don't know, is it called Uber Black, or where it's like limousine cars or very fancy cars like SUVs are used to pick people up because that's what they want. And then now we see the green card. The green card responds to the drivers, which is earn money when you want, right? So a lot of times when you talk to Uber drivers, it's like, yeah, you drive, it's cool. Some customers are cool, some riders are cool, some are not. But what's the main reason they would do this? Like, well, I can earn money during my free time, or hey, I'm my own boss. I can start and stop my schedule whenever I want to. You know, I don't think you'll ever hear an Uber driver say like, I'm pretty close to becoming a millionaire doing Uber, right? It's not like a high amount of money that you're making, but it is the freedom to choose your own time to work. And so that to them was they found to be the most important aspect, the important value that drivers felt about being an Uber driver. And then all the way to the left side, we'll go to key partners. So for them, they needed to have payment processors, right? So sure, you can build the app, but you need to make sure that your payment process is secure and can operate at scale, right? And they don't necessarily have the skill set within Uber to do that because, hey, there's PayPal, hey, there's Visa, there's all these other types of payment processors who can do all those things for you, right? So you don't have to develop that tech in house. You have a partner to do it. Investors, making sure that you have enough money to keep this business model going until the point it hits a scale in which Uber actually starts making money for itself instead of subsidizing all of this stuff by using investor money. Cool. Does anybody have a question about the Uber business model that they may have they don't understand or they may disagree?
Uh, no, I'm just wondering. So last November, I mean, in my opinion, unfortunately, Prop 22 passed.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just wondering, like hypothetically, what if Prop 22 didn't pass, and then drivers were counted as, I guess, full-time employees, right? Uh, I guess how would maybe the customer segment or the value proposition change? What do you think, hypothetically?
So you would actually probably move the driver's card from the customer segment part all the way to the key partner card, or um, a key resource.
Mm.
So something that you should also look at on the bottom of the this canvas, you'll see on the bottom left says cost structure. On the bottom right, you'll see revenue stream, right?
Mm-hmm.
For a successful business model, whatever number you come up on the revenue stream should be higher than the number you come up with the cost structure. Otherwise, you're going backwards. It means you're not making enough money to afford all the costs that you're, incurring. And so
Does Uber support car leasing and insurance and other activities as part of their activity?
Yep. As long as you are a licensed driver, Uber will find a way for you to be able to be part of their driver network. They realize that there's a big degree of instability when you just ask people to be drivers ad hoc. By being an Uber leaser, when you're leasing their car to drive, and they understand that your primary job or your primary source of income is actually being a driver. So they can count on those drivers operating in a geographical area pretty consistently, giving their network a bit of more robustness.
Just one comment on how well they acquire data and what they do with it. When I was using Uber and Lyft interchangeably, it would be when I had coupons or discounts or whatever. And I started noticing that the day after I used Lyft, I would get an Uber coupon the next day.
It's funny.
I think they were tracking where the car was. That was an Uber and Lyft car. So they knew that if I was taking a ride with somebody from my address, they could track where if the car had stopped at my address to pick up somebody, even if it wasn't an Uber car, if it was on an Uber platform, if the car stopped there, they knew they were picking someone up.
Yeah, I have no insights into that at all, but that's I wouldn't be surprised. That's right, like a lot of the times, right? This canvas just shows you the practical part of their canvas or their business, but yeah, there is a information aspect of this that you may not know how are they utilizing it yet, but it's out there. What are they going to do with that information? Charles, I saw that you had a comment?
No. I mean, Uber is Uber ever going to make money?
No, I don't know.
Right. I mean, it's a business that survives on, it's not clear to me that it will survive. It's kind of, they've taken a huge amount of an enormous amount of venture capital. They attempted to steal Google's intellectual property, for which their primary guy was just pardoned by the outgoing president. They are in the red. They have these huge problems with I just don't know if they're ever going to. I mean, I sort of suspect that Uber may exist as a government funded operation. Like it may end up being like a government service that has to be what's the term I'm looking for? Subsidized.
Yeah.
I think that may end up being that. That
or
was
like an Amtrak,
or a car company will buy them.
Maybe. I mean, right. I mean, one thing's for sure is that San Francisco is much, much better with Uber. I mean, it was basically it was a completely dysfunctional city. You call a cab and it would take an hour to get there. But they certainly solved an incredible problem, but it's not clear to me from a business perspective that I just don't see how they're going to survive.
But they did create a tremendous amount of congestion and traffic with the 40,000 drivers that all showed up at peak times in San Francisco.
That's true. There's a service.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, but at the same time, I mean, it's they're just such an incredibly useful product. You know, it's I mean, it was basically impossible to get around San Francisco before they arrived. So
Well,
I don't know in terms of how they're going to manage that complexity.
With the amount of congestion they cause, I could walk somewhere faster than I could have a car try to get through traffic to pick me up and then get through traffic again to take me where I was going.
Well, isn't that a question of the time, like when you go and, you know, like, I mean, San Francisco is a congested city.
Yeah, that's what happens.
It's not designed to have huge amounts of people in it. It's not just that. I mean, you know, it's just, I mean, it's just a congested city. There's too many people.
Well, there's a way to mitigate that. They do that in Europe, and that is there's congestion pricing for people who want to drive downtown in the central business district during rush hour.
Well, I mean, I guess they could do that for Uber. They could put a fee on Uber. I mean, you know, I was just commenting from a business perspective, they seem like they have a lot of challenges.
Sure.
Well, my comment is they're using the public right of way to make a profit, and that's something they should pay for.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, the San Francisco is a disaster. I mean, the trains don't run properly. Not everything is broken. You know, it's a disaster. So, you know, I don't know, public, I mean, they have a right to be on the road like anybody else. I mean, I think maybe they've been involved in some shady ways in which they got their business started. But I mean, yeah, I think the long term will just be nobody, you know, we all have discovered remote work. No one's going to go downtown anymore. So
when I was in Oregon, I actually did Uber. I was an Uber Eats driver for a few weeks. And the way they have it set up and the structure that they have it set up, I must have put 1,000 miles on our car within about a week. And the amount of wear and tear on the vehicle and the way they have it structured and how far they send you out to go do deliveries. And then you don't get any more deliveries until you drive all the way back into town. They can send you out into the middle of nowhere. You have to drive back because it won't give you any more jobs until you're back into that like main circle. So it's not a very good setup for anyone working it. That was just my personal experience, but I've seen other people complain about the same thing. So yeah, you're right. It's not a very good business model. And I think the only reason people are doing it is just out of desperation for work. So it will be interesting to see what happens in the next few years.
It's funny you mentioned that. I have a friend who had an idea for a startup. He's convinced that Uber is engaged in large scale insurance fraud.
I think, yeah,
he thinks what they're doing is the people who have the Uber, or not so much Uber, but people who own the Uber cars are then reselling the cars as used cars, but they're not telling people that the cars were used as Uber cars, which means that they're actually cabs. And because the cars will sit and idle, that it causes a huge amount of wear and tear that you would not have on a normal car. And that it's basically a type of auto insurance fraud, because the auto insurance is priced completely differently for a cab than it is for a normal car.
Yeah.
Because of and he's convinced of this. And he was going for a long period of time. He was going around taking pictures of every Uber car he could find, so he could store all the license plate numbers, so he could then design a database so he could sell to the insurance companies to track all the Uber cars that are, you know, it was this kind of thing, you know, like it was an interesting idea, you know, but it definitely, there are those kinds of things going on that are problematic. It's definitely, but I mean, it's from a use, I mean, if you look at the, like, anyway, that was just my comment. I was going to comment that they definitely have, they're a very challenged business.
And that's what makes this an interesting business model, because this is not a model that shows it can be profitable anytime in the near future.
True. Yeah. Let's look at another business model. Well, I have two more, so that way we can kind of. I try to choose businesses that I think most people are aware of. I think most people are aware of BMWs, right? A car manufacturer based in Bavaria, Munich, Germany. Let's take a look at their customer segments. One is performance-driven, quality-minded people. Wow, sounds really. It sounds really. It sounds really pretentious. And urbanites and conscious people. Sports life. This is really making me angry to read this. Okay.
Well, you know that BMW did focus groups to get to those points.
Oh yeah, of course. I understand. But so what the reasons why I use this BMW example is car, if you're say you're thinking of a car company traditionally, if you're not familiar with this canvas, say, oh, who do car manufacturers sell to? I guess, people who need a car. Yeah, that's fine. But it becomes, I'm trying to train for the purposes of this tool, is to train people to think in terms of persona. And it's a form of design thinking where you're trying to empathize with a certain type of customer, and you may not necessarily be that customer. You're the person who's a manufacturer, but you have to be in the mind of that customer to be able to best serve that customer, right? And so, I mean, so I've worked in Munich, specifically with BMW, and that in an intellectual property capacity with the European Union. And so I can tell you that the people who are BMW drivers, especially from the United States, yeah, they fit this persona pretty well, like this is what they're really sort of after. And if you take a look at the value proposition that the BMW has come out with, right? Uh, ultimate driving experience, active cruise control with stop and go, full electric, connected drive, parking and charging included, remote services, right? None of this stuff really talks about safety. None of it talks about great for families. None of it really talks about, some other features that like super fast. BMWs, yes, they're kind of fast, but they're not actually, you know, fast cars.
They also own Mini Cooper and Rolls Royce too, so they also have offshoots too.
Sure. And then we take a look at the key partners, right? The supply chain. That means people who provide tires, plastic parts for the seating, stuff like that. Their key partners are visionaries, which is fascinating. IT companies. So that means they're also trying to integrate their car experience to a more tech-driven experience. And another key partner is other car companies such as Toyota. Why do you think that's the case?
Maybe other parts or something, reliable parts, since Toyota's reliable with some
I
of
think
their
they
parts.
share development costs with other companies for things like airbags, for instance.
They do share those. A lot of those actually are supply chain partners, right? There's a car radio manufacturer that produces radios for multiple lines of cars. But specifically, why would they say other car companies?
Could they partner with other car companies to join their efforts towards lobbying?
That's a good one.
And also coming up for safety protocols for like DOT. Also, there's like a certain height that most cars have to have nowadays. So they all kind of keep things in a relative uniformity on the road. at like Mercedes-Benz, they're the ones that usually come up with most of the new technologies for cars, and then they get adopted into most of these other vehicles later down the road.
Very good. Very good.
Not always though.
That's,
I actually launched the first electric car for Mercedes-Benz.
Oh, nice.
They got pissed off when they saw Tesla in the headline. There were Tesla batteries. They did not like that, but I think it's the lobbying stuff that somebody had mentioned.
yes, that's primarily the reasons why we're such a key partner, because in industry, especially in industry as already sort of this industry is already kind of understood, right? Cars have been around for more than 100 years now, and there's a certain way of doing business in this industry where all the large players sort of know how to play well with one another, you know. Like for Ford, I believe Ford slaps on a couple of parts to a Toyota car and puts out that car as a sedan for Ford, because Ford is primarily concerned about the F-150 and their SUV line. Those are their money makers. They don't necessarily make sedans very well. So for some of their other cars, they actually rely on other car companies to license a bunch of parts and manufacturing techniques so they can produce those cars just to be able to make EPA standards for certain models.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Question: would there be any significant difference between BMW's and Mercedes business model canvas?
Yes, for sure. And so this is also the thing about the canvas. The canvas is a tool, but the tool is really just a mirror on the people who actually put it together, right? There's a general rule to how you put a canvas together, let's say in the car industries, that makes sense. But how the different car companies, the culture inside their company, how focused are they on engineering as opposed to experiences, as opposed to electric, they're really different. And because of that difference, it really appears on the business canvas on how you're able to bring that all together. Just like how I was looking at the BMW business model and I started getting upset at looking at the persona of who buys a BMW, because it's really not me. Like it does nothing about that really appeals to me. And I have friends who do drive a BMW, and that aspect of their personality is on full display because of their BMW owner, right? That's cool. Like I get it, right? That's what they're looking, that's what they're trying to tell everybody.
But don't those descriptions apply equally to Mercedes customers?
I don't know about that. There's a special.
It's funny about that. I just watched a Netflix documentary on cocaine crack conspiracy, and they were saying that almost all of the people back in the early 80s that were doing cocaine, that was the persona. They had the cocaine, they had the Mercedes. That was their it kind of went hand in hand. So it's kind of funny you mentioned that. Yeah, it does have kind of a stigma to the rich and elite. Yeah, driving the Mercedes.
Maybe you know Mercedes drivers better than I do, and I'm gonna say I really don't know too many Mercedes drivers. If they're very similar to BMW drivers, okay, that's interesting. I've always thought BMW were for younger people. That's my sort of, I guess, the brand, whatever brand seepage that has come into my brain from them. Is Mercedes is for classier, middle-aged people. BMWs are for people who want to be like showy and they're younger customers. But again, right, that's like a total stereotype persona that's in my mind.
And Volkswagens are for people who want to work on cars.
And I think Fiats are for people who like to walk. So
One point, Richard, that kind of impresses me about this is the key partners and the overlap between like Uber and BMW and Anthropocene. I mean, who are our key partners, and who are Uber's and BMW's key partners. And in some cases, it's kind of people in the same with the same motivations and trying to achieve the same goals and objectives are partners. And it reminded me of a dinner I went to where I sat between the two women that were the legal counsels for Uber and Lyft. And they had collaborated on a lot of activities in Sacramento together to stop or to or encourage legislation that favored their companies. So Uber and Lyft were key partners as well.
Yeah, it's I mean, I won't get too political, but they, lots of people outside DC think of the Republicans and Democrats are not friends, they're enemies. And they differ philosophically for sure of governance. But at the end of the day, they're both, the Republican and the Democrat are both actually just companies. They're not part of the Constitution. They're not these entities that exist inside government that need to be there. They are actually just private companies, and they are in the business of doing politics, right? And their revenue comes in through donations to the party, and their output are, policies for people. And how does it do it? Through lobbying, through all these other things, different ways of getting political things done. So, and you can't tell the Democratic Party to remove, their CEO or their whoever the head of their political thing is. No, they're a private company. They get to do whatever they want. And so it's really funny that the one thing that scares the both of them are voters.
So you don't see that as being different. Well, there's a fundamental difference between political party people in Washington and government agency employees.
Very different. Very different.
And how they operate, because I see that as sort of being, the levers that operate the machine, and then the machine.
Yes, yeah, those are very, very different entities. But I only use this as an example of like when you guys are saying, hey, shouldn't these car companies hate each other and they're trying to get market share? For sure, they're competing, but they would never do anything to hurt the entire pie, right? They don't want to do things that take away value from what they're doing, which means like, for a car company, it would be like, hey, let's introduce a $10,000 electric car that completely, turns the market upside down. Yes, that company can only exist for a short amount of time. It can really only exist to be able to build those cars and take its losses as long as it can, and then what, right? Like, there's very little entities out there that could sustain such a loss for a long enough time to completely change the industry, because there's millions or billions of people.
What's interesting about the automotive industry in general is, and this goes to any kind of like trucks or farm equipment or machinery, the dealer networks have a lot, and the dealer associations have about as much capital and equity value as the manufacturers, and they actually, in some regards, control development of new vehicles and determine what goes on the market more than the car companies can control independently.
Yeah.
For instance, Tesla had to sell direct because in many states and in many dealership networks, no dealers wanted to carry electric cars. and there are a lot of reasons for that. And a lot of states, a manufacturer is forbidden to, for other reasons, sell directly to consumers. So, this was a problem in Texas and in parts of the Northeast for Tesla, and they got around it somehow. But the reality is that the dealers have credit lines from local banks, and that's how they floor the inventory. Mm-hmm. And so that inventory then gets ordered from the manufacturer, and that line of credit then gets associated with that purchase order, and it's guaranteed by the local bank. So the local bank and the local dealer have a tremendous amount of power in the industry. I just thought that was an interesting note in terms of why it's difficult for electric vehicle manufacturers to launch products in the local market.
And that description that you just gave is actually very close to what a congressperson does in their local district too. In order to bring business into an area, there has to be an infrastructure that can support the sophistication of the business that it brings in. So the government contracts, different types of pork barrel type of activities that happen require your local infrastructure to multiply the efforts of the actual pork barrel consumer. So good example. The last one, this is a B2B software company. So this company produces accounting software. So who are the people who are going to be your customers? Actual accountants who need to use your software, but also business people who need accounting, right? Like maybe they can use this software for their venture. What's the value proposition? Well, create a platform to connect accountants with business people. So you're basically giving business people, instead of having to look for their own accountant, in the local, area, you can find it online. Easy way to get your taxes done anytime, anywhere, various levels of service. How sophisticated do you want this to be? So it's kind of like Uber, except now it's accountants instead of drivers, right? The other people are the accountants who are actually in your platform, who will do the work and get money for preparing taxes for businesses. Who are the key partners again? Oh, look at this. Payment processors are here again. And then in this case, it's tax regulators. So this payment processor, again, a key partner into this venture. It shows you the type of value that they bring into a digital economy, how important having this here. Reasons why a lot of companies that, let's say software companies use payment processors. Mike, are you there?
Yes.
Okay.
Why would I use Stripe or something?
Yes. Why would you use Stripe?
Because implementing that would take a lot of effort. That deals with financial transactions, credit cards. There's lots of rules and regulations that go with that stuff. Mm-hmm. And if someone else took care of that, then I'll gladly pay for that service, because I don't have if I was myself, I don't have the development time to build something like that.
Excellent. So there's a development time that Mike brings up. And another important issue, liability. Your liability of handling payment processing is a very heavily regulated field. You don't want to mess up there. So what you do is you find a payment processor who knows how to deal with this stuff and can accept the liability if something goes wrong. And that's why payment processors like as PayPal, Venmo, even the credit card companies, they've positioned themselves to be a very, very, very important partner in most businesses that happen around the world. So that's why that's their business model, to be a great partner.
It seems like Google Pay is moving in that direction.
That's why a company like Google would develop something like this. What you're trying to do is, hey, these payment processors are already sort of cemented in there. What you're trying to do is get a little bit more of the market. If you can even just get 5% of the market, that is billions and billions of revenue.
And then there's like another one, Zello, that runs through Bank of America. I just made a payment to my landlord through that. I mean, and it runs right through your bank app. I mean, it's just amazing how, or my roommate, she was still writing checks. And I'm like, have you heard of Zello? And, you know, it's just the speed of which these new apps are running now. It's just amazing. So it's really neat to see the changes on something like that.
I think Dell is actually owned by all the banks.
It is.
Oh, is it?
It's kind of
Nice.
Yeah. So they all collaborate together to make that service to compete with the other startups.
Nice.
Yeah, it's kind of like Hulu, where Hulu's owned by all the different content distributors. So they have their own channel to distribute their content. So it's like I think Hulu's owned by NBC, ABC. I know CBS has their own thing. They do their own thing. And Disney Plus purchased Fox. So yeah, Disney purchased Fox. So it's on there. And then Netflix is their own, and Amazon Prime is their own too.
Nice.
Cool. All right. Are there any questions about the slide presentation that I've done so far?
How come GameStop wasn't there?
Next question. Next question that's not so poisonous.
Yeah, well, my big question is why isn't environmental impact included on the business model canvas? You know, like back to the automobile example, there's this whole, I've been seeing a lot of stuff around smart EV chargers and changing the ability through them to change the electric utility sector from like the pipe model, you know, where you have centralized generation and all the power flows toward end user demand, to a platform model where the stakeholders all interact with one another, you know, so like generation, transmission, distribution, all that can shift back and forth fluidly. But I mean, to me, it seems so outdated that the canvas doesn't include that whole bigger picture outside of their industry sector type of effect and what that can, you know. I know it's not a hard dollar thing, but I've always been amazed that it's like, well, that should be included in the canvas.
So are you talking about the car OEM one specifically, or just in general?
Just in general. Just in general. That I was just saying that's like one example.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. So that I wish that question came at the end of the question. So I'm planning on doing one with you guys right now in real time with Micah's help. But before we get to that one, before we address Stacy's question, are there any other questions?
I just have one comment.
Please.
And it's a very personal one. Lyft is not the same as Uber, you guys.
Nope.
Sorry.
They're not.
And I have personal experience from that, where I was frightened and I thought I was going to lose my life in New York City with clients from Italy. And that was when Uber was very, very still early yet. So, I mean, if I have an opportunity to choose one or the other, I will always choose Lyft. So I know Lyft doesn't have Uber Lyft Eats, but if they did, I'd order through that.
There's other things like DoorDash, I guess, right?
Yeah.
DoorDash.
Yeah, that's right.
I-
But we all have bills to pay, right? So I get it.
That's true. That's true. But you are absolutely right, because there are two dominant car ride sharing companies I think of, right? Uber and Lyft. But I always hear, especially on the corporate social responsibility side, Uber has a lot of difficulty sort of getting their act together on a lot of things. So they took a big social hit for like 2 to 3 years, maybe 2-3 years ago now. But they took out the founder,
Yep.
put in a new CEO, and directly address a lot of the core characteristics of their company's governance right there in front of everyone. And that doesn't normally happen for a VC-backed company, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're always like, hey, let the guys, let the boys be the boys or whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no longer.
And then of course you guys all know because of COVID, there's no one's doing carpool stuff. I know that was mentioned earlier. It's like there's no carpooling of anything.
Cool. Yeah, I have not taken an Uber since the pandemic started. Or Lyft.
And you guys can imagine the kind of role that Stacy and I play when we're on a. Prior to COVID, we actually used to do physical press tours. So Uber and Lyfts for us was amazing. It was kind of a miracle for us, right? I mean, we came from the days of doing MapQuest and having to print out maps and all that kind of stuff. But the fact that we go door to door to the journalists and meet with them and actually do demos for them, Uber and Lyfts were like amazing for us. It's one less thing we had to worry about. Sorry, that's all I had.
That's a good comment. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks.
Okay. Do we want to try to do this? Do we have enough time? Oh, it's already 2:00. Okay. So unfortunately, it's already 2:00. Let me see. Let me look at my calendar to make sure when my next meeting is.
It's only with engineering if you are joining that.
It's only with engineering. Excellent. Thank you, engineering.
Good one. Good
Thank
one.
you for downplaying the importance of your meeting.
It's only with engineering.
All right. Would we like to try to go through one canvas together quickly? Okay.
Only if it's about corn farmers.
No corn farmers. I've definitely improved my examples. Well, it doesn't sound like anybody does want to go through one. So I guess that's it for today.
Were you planning to do one for Anthropocene?
Yes, but again, no one responded. So I think that's the end of this meeting.
That would be pretty fascinating.
Charles had a comment.
Oh, Charles.
Yeah, I mean, my question was the businesses we look at that we're concerted, things like advanced nuclear, modular nuclear, or carbon capture, or some of the other climate technologies. And I would imagine that these these companies need large amounts of funding, right? I mean, and in order to raise money for these kinds of companies, you have to be able to present some sort of financial model that is attractive and probably to a lot of conservative investors. And I was just kind of curious how the business model canvas would look like for those kinds of companies and how you can convince more traditional investors to put money into them.
So there's multiple factors that go into it, but I think the biggest one for the question that you're asking is their tolerance of time, right?
That's right.
Time is the largest factor, not even risk per se. It's not even engineering risk. It's not even regulatory risk. It's time, right?
That's correct. Yeah, time.
And so if you're going to deal with a timeline of 20, 25 years before you see a return, that probably doesn't work on an individual investor's personal timeline that they have, but it does work with institutions and government timelines.
I don't know about institutions. I mean, there are a lot of very traditional investment banks that if you tell them there's a 20-year earnout, I don't think they're going to go for it. I think they're going to want to see, because in the end, there's always a guy inside the company who has to champion the investment.
For sure.
And he's not going to look good if it takes 20 years.
I don't know about that. Because if that were the case, then I would not, and why do we even have nuclear power plants that exist? Right.
That's a good question. Okay. I don't know who the investors are.
So most likely the investors are all backed by um, sovereign entities.
Sovereign wealth funds, right?
Exactly. And they're
That's a different.
It is very different.
Yeah, that's I was thinking more like, I mean, I'm asking this question because I have access to this kind of stuff, and we've had this discussion. Frank and I have done some of this. He knows about that, and yeah, time is the big one, right? And it's I think that sovereign wealth funds would probably be it. Yeah, because they're making an investment in the company and they don't really care. They're not worried about that kind of stuff. I think, it's the same with something like, Uber. Uber is not, the venture capitalists have invested in Uber, but they're not making any money.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, their principals are going to look at them and go, where's the money?
Yeah. No, absolutely, and that's how we understand, right? Like, not one funding entity or capital controlling entity can really be suitable for all different types of business models, right? Like I can't go up to, I can't go up to some nuclear power plant manufacturer and say, hey, I've got $100,000. I'd like to invest into your nuclear power plant, please. And then wait until like I'm 70 before I see a single dollar come back.
Let me give you an example. In some cases, and I know this from having discussions with these folks, AFL-CIO pension funds and union pension funds. Their union members need to build buildings and bridges and power plants. And if their pension fund can fund those infrastructure projects, then it results in jobs for their members. So that's where their interests align with their investment.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point.
That's a very good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. That would be the target.
So I think nobody had the request to do the business model canvas. So I would just try to answer, Stacy, your inquiry, right? On how do we use this tool in terms of a general environmental business. It's really difficult to answer the question on a specific, on such a general topic, but it would be very beneficial to use this tool on a specific project that's in that area. So, you had mentioned electric cars, right, before. If we were to understand, or actually, Micah, can you share your screen?
Yeah, my point was around smart chargers.
Smart chargers, okay.
Smart chargers and how they can provide intelligence to and from the grid to try to utility grid.
Mm-hmm.
I've read a fair amount about this
Mm-hmm.
in terms of lowering demand on the grid when power demand is high, and also sort of making, being the conduit between end user, turning it from a pipeline to more of a platform where there's an exchange of energy.
So that business model for sure exists. I would, if you don't mind, if I may take the liberty of even revving it up a little bit more, that particular platform. What if we started, Charles? I think you might know the name of this. I forgot the name of this engineering thing, but basically making electric cars into batteries that feed back into the system during high time, and then are able to take the receive energy during the evening hours.
You mean a flywheel?
And I'm saying that actually is starting to happen with smart chargers. The smart chargers are just the way that the data goes back and forth.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. Excellent.
Not the right. So it works in conjunction with the battery storage.
Not this one. Not a flywheel.
Yeah, we're actually working on a vehicle to grid and vehicle to home.
Yes.
technology demonstration
Okay.
with Apparent Energy and consultant.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to see what the model is for successfully implementing that. And one of the questions is, does it work for the individual homeowner, car owner, or is it more ideal for the fleet operator with let's say, a distributed generation and integration with the grid, kind of a model that aggregates 500 kilowatts or more into a distributed resource, or what is the homeowner willing to give up? Are they only willing to give up 20% of their charge in their car, or will they give up 80% to contribute to the health of the grid?
Mm-hmm.
And what's the value of doing that to the homeowner, car owner, and grid operator?
So what an interesting concept if you took a large, I don't know, let's take a look at SFO, San Francisco's car rental center, right? And you are able to integrate a electric charger into each of those stalls. And then now SFO car rental center becomes this huge storage site of batteries because there's cars coming in and out of the facility all the time. And then your promise to any car rental, any renter says, oh yeah, you're going to receive a car and we guarantee you that there's at least a 75% charge on the car. Because there's what they're trying to say is that maybe the top 25%, from 100, from 99 to 75, they can use it as contributing back into the grid during peak hours, and then they'll charge their cars at nighttime. You've now made your car rental company where, yes, you're making money from the car rental, but there's a potential for being able to be a large source energy capacity site by using all of your cars as batteries for distributing energy during peak hours. What does the economics look like if you were to do something like that, right? Like we're moving away from a house, and you're talking. I think you mentioned a fleet. Just the most obvious fleet that comes to my mind is just a car rental, facility, and that exists. Okay, cool. What happens if you're a car dealership and you have all these spaces for cars, and now you just sell electric cars, and while they're on the lot, they can actually they actually act like a capacitance node in the grid, where if they're just sitting on the lot and they're acting as a battery storage place, and then maybe there's some people come in for test drives of cars, okay, but for most part the lot's filled with a bunch of basically batteries there, and you can feed back into the grid in the daytime and then take the power back out at nighttime. It I don't know what the economics look like, but I mean that sort of addresses a little bit of what you were talking about, right, Stacey?
Yeah, I think that's a no cost to anyone and benefits everyone kind of solution. Either reducing cost or improving performance or overhead. So I think in that regard, that could be a winning solution. It's just a question of modeling the dynamics in the marketing area and the actual value. But I don't think there's any incremental cost component.